So, everybody's obviously dying to talk about abortion. I think it's funny. We are so complicit in this atrocious, vicious, evil, awful abortion culture that we can't talk about it at all. That we've said forever that Social Security is the third rail of American politics. That is obviously not so. Abortion is the third rail of American politics. Anyone who touches it is immediately persona non grata. I care, not at all. I do not care. I think it's very important to take this up and to deal with it because I think it is the fundamental distinction to be made among moral philosophies. Is a moral philosophy anti-life or pro-life? I would argue that my philosophy is uniquely pro-life. There is no other pro-life philosophy. There are some that come close, and those I admire and tend to support in the ways that I can, but the viciously anti-life philosophy has a complete death grip, as it were, on our culture to the extent that we don't even notice it. It's the water we swim in, and we don't even notice that it is ubiquitous. The idea of transaborted is what got me here. Before the Planned Parenthood videos started coming out, the realization that the young people walking around me right now are fundamentally transaborted. They are abortuses who didn't make the cut. They are missed appointments. Not all of them, thank God, not all of them, but many of them, and they know it, and that's really sad. They know it. And they are growing into an age where they risk becoming transaborted transaborters. That first they will exterminate a kid or two or three or five, and then eventually at age 35 or 40 get around to trying to have children and manage to pop out one or two maybe, but never have that commitment to human life that is the sine qua non of a pro-life philosophy. That to be pro-abortion in any way at all is to have subscribed, knowingly or not, to that anti-life philosophy, and it will color every decision that you make in the course of your life. I wrote about this, about the juvenilization of humanity by means of this maybe I will, maybe I won't, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I can, maybe I can't. This halfway world that we all live in, this world of vacillating indecision, is all about being uncommitted to the lives of our own children, being uncommitted to the lives of the human race as such, being uncommitted to life. Not seeking death, not pro-death, not avidly pursuing death, but not avidly pursuing life either, not avidly doing anything, having zero impact on the universe by having zero impact on your own self, by having a self that is seemingly devoted to holding its place at zero, neither advocating nor opposing, neither championing nor deriding, neither embracing or shunning, neither being or not being. The bad news is you can't hold yourself at zero. If you're not aimed at splendor, you're aimed at squalor by default. I've been thinking about alternative arguments about abortion. My argument about abortion is entirely egoistic. I made it 3 years ago, and it's only gotten better over time. I have never had any sort of disagreement on this subject. I've never met any sort of disagreement. I get cavilling, I get emotional complaints, I get a whole lot of vituperation from people who want to have eaten their cake and still have it. Hello, Ayn Rand. But I've met with no serious arguments against the claims that I make about the anegoistic nature of abortion, that being instrumentally involved in an abortion will result in lifelong damage to your self-image. You will love yourself less necessarily for the rest of your life. Your memory of your having been involved in this atrocity will recall itself to your attention again and again and again, unbidden. You won't be able to cause it to happen, lucky you, but you won't be able to prevent it from happening. It will come back to you again and again and again, and that murder will never be over for you. That to bring the child to birth and give it up for adoption, whether you stay involved in the child's life or not, will give you closure, whereas killing that child will never give you closure, will result in enduring lifelong damage to your self-image, will make your life much more miserable than it could have and should have been, all because you attempted to have your cake after having eaten it. All because you pursued a contradiction. And I can demonstrate all of that, and demonstrate the lifelong consequences as well. The way that that commitment to infanticide makes you uncommitted to every other value in your life, or less committed to every other value of your life, makes you less committed or thoroughly uncommitted to adult values, so that pro-abortionists are adolescents much, much longer, maybe adolescents for life, but never really grow into appropriate adult values, and therefore never experience, never live, and never leave behind them the legacy of having lived those adult values, which means their children not only don't grow into adult values, there's excellent chance that they never even see any expressions of adult values because everyone around them is a lifelong teenager. I can make that argument thoroughly, and I really like it. I like it particularly because it doesn't attend directly to the murder of the child at all. The murder of the child is an obvious injustice, is a complete act of vicious cruelty, unbelievable cruelty. We would have no problem at all understanding the cruelty if we were talking about a cat or a lion. But as soon as we're talking about a genetic Homo sapiens that is fortunately out of sight and attestedly, putatively, deceptively, not out of mind. It is not out of mind. We say it's out of sight and out of mind. It may be out of sight. It is never out of mind, especially if you kill it. But my argument against abortion doesn't really have anything to do with the abortus himself. He's suffering a complete injustice. His entire experience of consciousness, of exactly the kind of consciousness that we find in a kitten, his entire experience of consciousness will be a short spasm of unendurable, excruciating pain. That if you imagine the pain of the Nazarene hanging from the cross for 6 or 12 hours or whatever it was, and concentrate all of that pain into 6 seconds. This is the conscious experience of the life of your child when you choose to kill it in the womb. 6 seconds of excruciating pain. All you have to do is think about that and you're done. That's all you have to do is think about it and you're done. That's why no one wants to talk about this, because no one wants you to think about it. But I've been thinking about analogical arguments that I could use to help people understand the moral consequences of what they're doing. And all of this relates to empathy strategies, because everything I have to talk about relates to empathy strategies. And it's important to understand the distribution of empathy responses in other people. So, mammalian empathy is reciprocal. Mammalian empathy gives to get. Mammalian empathy looks for mutual exchanges of values, mutually rewarding exchanges of values. The more rewarding, the better. The more transactions there are, the better. The more intense they are, the more frequent they are. Mammalian empathy seeks to trade good for good. This is the only kind of empathy that academic science pays any attention to. What they call empathy is mammalian empathy. They have no awareness of reptilian empathy, or if they are aware of it, they don't see it as being empathy, and they call it sociopathy instead. But reptilian empathy is unilateral. The purpose of reptilian empathy is to achieve the actor's objectives regardless of what happens to anyone else. Not necessarily to seek pain or loss in the other party, although that can be a part of reptilian empathy, but to seek the actor's gain regardless. That's what the purpose of the act is to seek the actor's gain, and the actor is not seeking a mutually rewarding reciprocal exchange. He only wants what he wants. And so cautious people, considered exclusively, there really is no one who is exclusively cautious or exclusively driven, but considered exclusively, cautious people are the least likely to exhibit mammalian empathy because they are most dominated in their empathy strategies by reptilian empathy. The next degree up, the next level up would be the incandescent. They are more likely to engage in mutually rewarding reciprocal exchanges, but not much more. And because they greet aggressively and in pursuit of affection, even the empathy strategies that look relatively mammalian will tend to be imbued with that kind of unilateral reptilian empathy, that when an incandescent person seems to be pursuing a mammalian empathy strategy, it may well be reptilian with mammalian overlays, that it may look mammalian to a sociable and entirely self-seeking to a cautious person. It depends on how you view what that person is doing and how you view his objectives. But chances are the incandescent person himself thinks he's seeking his own benefit. He's not looking for anyone else's benefit, but only for his own. The next level up would be driven. Driven people greet affectionately in pursuit of reptilian rewards. They greet as mammals in pursuit of reptilian rewards, in pursuit of the safety that comes about by the accumulation of mass abundance, the accumulation of abundant wealth. This is what drives driven people, not necessarily wealth as luxury, but wealth as security against the vicissitudes of outrageous fortune. And that reciprocal give-to-get, mutually rewarding mammalian strategy even then has that reptilian overlay because it is seeking those reptilian benefits. The only inbound, outbound, display, pursuit, affection, the only kind of truly mammalian empathy strategies that we'll see in human beings are among sociables. Sociables give to get all the time. They offer affection in pursuit of affection, and looking for those affectionate feedback loops where the displays and responses are escalating over time. They're looking for love, and they want their loves to grow richer, deeper, more satisfying over time. So the reactions of particular disc types to the idea of abortion is going to be radically different, and their willingness to accept analogical arguments is likely to be different too. The problem with analogies is always the fallacy of the specious analogy, that when you're making an analogical argument, it is necessary to understand where your analogy is alike unto the process you're attempting to analogize and where it is different. And if the differences are too consequential, if they are of the essence, then the analogy fails. It's a specious analogy because the two circumstances are not, in fact, analogical. You are straining at gnats, or attacking straw men, or doing other fallacious activities. You're not making a sound or reasonable argument. And the reasonableness of analogical arguments about abortion is going to vary among listeners depending on where they fit into the disc profile. So analogies about abortion are going to seem very, very compelling to sociables and really dubious to the cautious. And you can follow that distribution that I gave you. The sociables will find the most likely, most reasonable, most apt, apposite, most compelling, most convincing. The driven's next, the incandescent's next after that, and the cautious last. You will hear the word irrational a lot when the subject of abortion comes up. And I'm a huge fan of the word irrational, but I always mean proportionate. That's what rational means, is to reason in proportion to the facts. That when you reject facts with the word irrational, then, as far as I'm concerned, you've left honest discourse. You've left reasonable persuasion. because you are insisting that someone is making an argument that is disproportionate to something that is not, in fact, factually true. Making disproportionate arguments about untruths is mental masturbation at best. It has nothing to do with rationality or irrationality, except to say that it is completely irrational to make any sort of statements about factually untrue claims. So I'm going to offer up my analogies, and you're free to embrace them or reject them at your choice. None of these is exactly analogous to the circumstances surrounding the question of abortion, but they're all interesting to me as a way of establishing the boundaries of the enduring obligations that we create by our actions. So my first analogy is to equate the baby with a bug, with a cockroach or a scorpion, mouse, vermin. And this is the claim that's made, especially by cautious people, but by all pro-abortion advocates, that it's just a clump of cells. That's what the Ayn Rand Institute says. It's just a clump of cells, just a bit of protoplasm. Every organism is a bit of protoplasm. This is a distinction without a difference. The purpose of this is to dehumanize the child. The child is not a human being. It's okay to dehumanize it as far as I'm concerned. It won't be a child until it's 5 years. It won't be a human being until it's 5 years old. But it is a genetic Homo sapiens, and it is not anything else. It is not a flower. It is not an umbrella. It is not last Wednesday. It is a genetic Homo sapiens, and to the extent that we all agree that genetic Homo sapiens are not to be murdered, it is not to be murdered. If you equate it with a bug instead, or a clump of cells, a bit of protoplasm, a vermin of some sort, then you can rationalize killing it very easily. And I will tell you that the less like you the baby is at the time you kill it, the less enduringly consequential the decision will be to you, no matter where you fit on the DISC profile. That for a sociable, to kill a baby is always, always, always going to result in unendurable agony. That if you are sociable in the DISC profile, if you are very affectionate in the way you greet people and very loving in the way that they respond to you, and you're always looking to make new friends, make deeper relationships, if your ideal state of social relationships is to regard people as family to you, you should never, ever, ever be instrumentally involved in abortion, because it will destroy you from the inside out. If you're cautious, you have a much greater chance of being able to exclude it from your consciousness, of being able to soldier on without the emotional consequences. No one is perfectly cautious. Every cautious person will have some aspects of sociability within them, of mammalian empathy within them, particularly women. Women are born to be sociable. They are engineered by their genes to be sociable. It is not ever the case that a woman could be as indifferent to pain and suffering as a man can be. We are constructed differently. Men are constructed to achieve that sort of dispassion, that sort of disaffection, that distance from pain and suffering, because somebody's got to kill the bad guy, and it falls to men to do it. Men have to be able to engage in outrageously atrocious, vicious violence in order to achieve their own self-defense and the defense of their wives and children. We're made differently. Men are closer to being born killers, and women are much, much, much closer, all but exclusively, born nurturers. And their inability to kill without conscience, as it were, puts them in an awful situation when they're anticipating killing their own children. The sociable, considered as a DISC personality profile, will have a terrible time living through the consequences of abortion, and women in general will have a worse time than men living through those consequences, because women are born to love. They're born to love. that women can be cautious, women can be incandescent, women can be driven, but women are always going to be sociable, and it is a terrible idea for a woman to kill her own child, to kill a mouse, to kill a cockroach, to kill a scorpion. Women can do this, and tough women like nurses are able to live with the kind of viscera and blood that other women find really, really disquieting. But nevertheless, women aren't built to do this, and that's why every married man calls her husband to kill the bug when there's the bug to be killed, and especially if it's something like a scorpion or a mouse. A scorpion is difficult to kill. It's not at all hard to be dispassionate about killing a scorpion. When you see a live scorpion in your house, all you want is for that bug to be dead. Killing a mouse is much harder for men than killing a cockroach. Virtually impossible, not impossible, but significantly much more difficult for a woman to kill a rodent. And these are things that we want dead. These are things that we do not want living in our houses. That maybe you want to be a kind-hearted Gandhi and evict the mouse from your home alive if you can. But if you can't, you're going to kill it. And the question is, having killed it, how are you going to feel about yourself afterward? Well, if it's just a bug, it's probably not going to affect anyone all that much. If it's a scorpion, it may infest your nightmares anyway, even though you don't feel any enduring guilt for having taken that life. Nevertheless, the scorpion may infest your nightmares anyway, because scorpions are creatures of nightmare. If it's a rodent, easily it could be a source of enduring guilt. And to say that it's irrational to have this guilt is to say that it is inappropriate for human beings to be organisms. It is inappropriate for human beings to be mammals. You react to this kind of atrocity, this kind of violence against other organisms, because you are alike unto them an organism, and you respond as an organism. That it is not at all irrational for dogs who have been in a fight to be exercised for a half hour afterward, to feel that adrenaline and rage continuing to course through their veins. This is in the nature of being an organism. It's the same thing for you. If you got into a violent altercation, you would experience after effects in the immediate aftermath, but you, unlike the dog, would experience after effects for the rest of your life, because you have conscious memory and they don't. It is a matter of consequence when you kill another organism. And how great a consequence is really a reflection of your own distance, the distance you have in your mind between that organism and you. How much you identify with that organism. You don't identify at all with a cockroach. You anti-identify with a scorpion. But it's highly likely that if you are mammalian in your empathy strategies in any way at all, it's highly likely that killing a mouse will have enduring consequences on your happiness going forward. You'll be less happy as a result of having done that. And that's interesting to me, because you cannot make that analogy about a genetic Homo sapiens. You can't get away with calling it a bug. You can't get away with calling it a clump of cells. You know that it's a genetic Homo sapiens, and the longer it matures inside the womb, the more it comes to resemble you, and the more it comes to resemble you, the harder it will be for you to rationalize killing that organism, that genetic Homo sapiens, that child, that baby, that son or daughter of yours. You know all these things. You can't deny your knowledge of these things. And because you know them, because you cannot deny your knowledge of them, you cannot possibly claim that you can kill your own son or daughter in the womb without those enduring lifelong emotional consequences. An even better analogy from my point of view would be to think about having adopted a kitten. That you adopt a kitten at 8 weeks, newly weaned, and it's so cute, it's just adorable, and it climbs all over everything, and it gets stuck on the fabric of the curtains because it can put its claws out, but it can't figure out how to retract them, or it can't retract them without falling. It does all kinds of goofy, wonderful stuff. And as it gets older, it does less and less and sleeps more and more, and you realize all it really does is eat and shit, and it's just stinking up the place. And if it's awake at all, it's clawing at the carpet, it's destroying the carpet. You're going to have to replace that carpet because you foolishly adopted this dumbass cat. And so the question is, what do you do? Kill it or adopt it out? You can take it down to the vet or take it to the Humane Society, and they will euthanize that cat. They will put it to sleep. That's what they were going to put it to sleep. They like to lie to you, just like abortionists. They like to lie to you. We'll put it to sleep. It'll be a painless death. And that much is true. At least it'll be painless. They'll narcotize the cat first, and then whatever poisons they use on it don't cause any pain. I've had the misfortune of seeing too many animals put to sleep, not because I wanted to rid myself of the burden of them, but because they were dying. And this is a gentle thing that we can do for animals that we can't do for human beings, because we cannot ever rationalize homicide without getting to something very close to 100% homicide. We lived through that in the 20th century. But if you elect to euthanize, kill, put to sleep, assassinate, exterminate that cat, that choice will be with you for the rest of your life. This is much alike killing the mouse or killing the baby. This is a poor choice that will recall itself to your memory again and again and again for the rest of your life, whereas adopting it out will give you closure, will give you a way of understanding the termination of your relationship with that cat without having terminated its life, and you will be able to go on knowing that you did the right thing, as opposed to having done the wrong thing. Another analogy that's very appealing to me is the analogy of the hitchhiker, that you're driving along. I've never hitchhiked and I've never picked up a hitchhiker. I am relating the experience of hitchhiking entirely on the basis of imagination. So if you want to reject it on that basis, feel free. But you're driving along and there's a hitchhiker. It's raining. Give yourself a reason to stop and pick up this fool. He looks harmless, you feel safe, and it's raining. You want to do something nice for this poor schmuck who's out there hitchhiking in the rain, so you pick him up. Where are you headed? L.A. I can take you as far as Bakersfield. That's what you said. I can take you as far as Bakersfield. Driving on the I-15. And then you start driving, and a hitchhiker starts talking, and he won't shut up. And everything he says is shit. And I don't care what you think is shit. You think what he has to say is shit. Everything he says is shit, and he will not shut up. And it is 97 miles from here to Bakersfield, and that means you got 97 minutes at least of listening to this moron rail on and on and on about things that are of no importance to you and are deeply annoying to you, and you wish you had not picked him up. What is your obligation to that hitchhiker? And I would say, when you said, I can take you as far as Bakersfield, you promised to take him as far as Bakersfield. That the fact that you made a poor choice in picking him up is not his fault. The fact that you could have guessed that he might prove to be annoying to you and chose to pick him up anyway is not his fault. The fact that you would so much rather be alone than listening to him is not his fault. You made a promise, and now you have to deliver on it. And the reason that this is analogous to abortion is that when you voluntarily have sex, he's fecund, she's fertile, couple has sex, they are voluntarily agreeing to pick up a hitchhiker. May not happen, almost never does. Almost never happens. The world is full of 7 billion people who are really unlikely genetic accidents. And if you consider how much semen you throw at how many eggs in the course of your marriage, if you end up with 3 children, that's a lot these days, but if you had 6, which would have been a lot 100 years ago, that's really a miracle. She's born with around 400 eggs, and if she actually successfully uses 10% of them, that's a modern-day miracle. And meanwhile, you're using birth control that she's got a diaphragm with spermicide coated all on the inside of it, and he's got spermicidally lubricated condoms. They're each working from 98% plus perfect birth control, so it's 98% plus squared maybe. I don't know what the odds are in that circumstance. If they're both doing double duty birth control, I don't know what the odds against conception would be, but it must be huge. But nevertheless, he's fecund, she's fertile. I don't care what birth control you're using, any or none. If you are engaged in sexual activity, You were volunteering to pick up the hitchhiker, and when you volunteer to pick up the hitchhiker, you are simultaneously committing him to taking him all the way to Bakersfield. That's the commitment that you're making by having sex. And this is the reason why you should never have sex outside the context of marriage. By marriage, of course, I mean the mutual commitment of the partners, not the incantation of a priest or a judge. I don't care what you do in the way of ceremony. If you're not mutually committed to each other, fully committed to the us of you, committed to your marriage, committed to your lifelong marriage, if both of you are not fully equally committed to your lifelong marriage, you're not married no matter how many ceremonies you have. And if you are fully mutually committed to each other for life, then you don't have to have a ceremony. You're married to each other. You should never have sex outside the context of marriage, because when you have sex outside the context of marriage, you are making a 20-year commitment to a hitchhiker who you may not want in your life. You're making a 20-year commitment to that hitchhiker, whether you want him in your life or not. That the pro-abortion forces say we want to make sure that the only children born are wanted children. Well, the only way to express wanting children is to make love with someone that you're married to. That's the way that you express the desire to have children, and everything else is the way to get away with sexual gratification without trying to escape the risk of that obligation. You cannot escape the risk of that obligation. That if you have sex and the result is a fertilized egg, you have incurred a 20-year, fundamentally a lifelong obligation, but serious commitment of 20 years by your choice. You chose to do that. You can't escape the consequences of those choices. And the worst way of trying to escape the consequences of those choices is to try to terminate the pregnancy, to exterminate the child, to kill your own son or daughter. This is the worst way of fulfilling that obligation, because it's the one that's going to result in unendurable emotional pain with absolutely no upside, no benefit, whatever. You made the worst possible choice in terminating your child. So the next level of evasion from the pro-abortion forces would be, what about rape? You will hear anarcho-capitalists in particular refer to the child in the womb as being a squatter, a hostile occupant of the territory. Squatting is open, hostile, ongoing. There are legal standards that one uses to establish whether or not someone is squatting or merely trespassing. But this is, in my opinion, this is a specious analogy. This is a good example of a specious analogy to refer to the child as a squatter, because a squatter is there by his own free choice. He's there voluntarily. He chose to be there. This is not the case with the child. The child did not. If you do not kill your child someday, it won't be very long, 8 or 9 years from now, your child will turn to you with venom in the eyes and say, "I didn't ask to be born." This is a rite of passage. I don't know that any, and certainly every American child says this at some time or another. Sometime between the ages of 6 and 15, you can count on your child. "I didn't ask to be born." And that's literally true. The child did not ask to be conceived. The child did not ask to come into existence. It definitely, certainly is not asking to be eradicated. It is not asking to be flushed out of existence. But having come into existence in the womb, not of its own free choice, it is not a squatter, it is not an interloper, it is not a trespasser, it is not a criminal, it is not in violation of anyone's rights. And to evict that squatter is a crime, is an act of vicious immorality, it is a murder, it is a homicide. If you want to argue that you can evict the child at the point at which it could be adopted, I don't know what's the difference between that and a live birth, except possibly hastening a live birth with drugs or something like that. This is achieving the kind of closure that we're talking about. You're giving birth to a genetic Homo sapiens who can now be adopted by someone who wants to raise that child into a glorious human being. If you can evict without homicide, okay, fine, but you can't. Abortion is not eviction of a squatter. It is the homicide of your son or daughter. It is the murder of your son or daughter. That's what it is. And the squatter argument fails on that basis. The moral commitment is exactly the same as the hitchhiker commitment. And what about rape? You know, that mom got pregnant as the result of a rape. I find this hugely unlikely. Remember that pregnancy itself is difficult to achieve even when you're trying to do it. Rape is a forcible rape. Actual violent rape is a very, very, very rare crime. And so, again, you're talking about two extremely rare circumstances. It can happen. It has happened. There are black swans, just not very many of them. I would expect that most claims about rape and abortion are made up, just as I think that most claims about children drowning in bathtubs or drowning in swimming pools or being cooked alive in hot cars. I think most of those stories are made up. I think they're extrauterine abortions 18 months or 2 years late. Yes, there are children who die by accident, and yes, I do feel deeply for all the parents involved in this, whether they murdered their children or not. I feel deeply for them. The ones who didn't murder their children, the ones who suffered an actual accidental loss of a child, I feel very, very sorry for them, but I think they are the rare circumstance, that they are 1 out of 10 at most, and maybe 1 out of 100. That most of the stories you hear about children dying in bathtubs, swimming pools, or hot cars are murders. Crib death, too, I'm inclined to think is most often suffocation. Which is not a jaundiced view of human life. It's just a recognition that babies drive you crazy. They do. But because a child is such an enormous responsibility, that to bring a child into the world is such a huge commitment, parents are paranoid about injuries that could affect their children, about accidents that could take their children's lives. And so the fact that someone could successfully ignore a child for 5 or 6 minutes in a tub or a pool, or a half hour in a car, successfully ignore their child, forget their child in the back of the car, etc. I just don't believe these stories. I think we're hearing about homicides. There is no moral justification for any of this. There is no moral justification for homicide. The reason for faking the accident is to get away with murder, as it were, but you can't get away with murder. You never get away with murder. There is no such thing as an unwitnessed crime. A crime is intentional. The intent implies awareness. The awareness never goes away. It will recall itself to your memory again and again and again. You don't have the right to evict the squatter, and you don't have the right to evict the squatter when he lives in the nursery down the hall. You never have the right to kill your own child, and killing your own child will result in enduring lifelong agony for you as the actor. The last analogy that I want to talk about today is the analogy of the lifeboat. And lifeboat arguments are always suspect because the universe is not a lifeboat. It is the rarest of circumstances to be in a situation where lifeboat ethics might come into play. I will give you an example of lifeboat ethics. I am the captain of our lifeboat. We have 9 survivors plus me. There are 10 of us on our little lifeboat, and we're fine. We're going to be okay, except that one of the people on our lifeboat lost his mind in the shipwreck, is really hysterically out of control, may recover, may be fine 2 weeks from now, but is hysterically out of control right now and is deliberately attempting to chop a hole in the hull of our lifeboat. That he is so crazy that he is doing damage to the boat that will result in the loss of every life on that boat, and the lifeboat ethics that obtain in that instance is to grab the son of a bitch by his collar and his belt loops and throw him overboard. That is what is existentially necessary to save everyone else's lives. There is no time for deliberation. There is no time for arrest, trial, incarceration. There is no time for anything else that we might do on land in normal circumstances. The failure to act in that circumstance will result in the death of everyone, and therefore it is thoroughly morally justifiable to throw that son of a bitch overboard and watch him drown. And you had better have a man to do that job, because the women won't be able to do it. But the lifeboat ethics situation that I want to talk about here consists of you and a child on a lifeboat. There's been a shipwreck. You and the child managed to swim your way to a capsized lifeboat. It's already capsized and you can't right it, you can't tip it over, but you can cling to it. And the child is there in your arms. This is a stranger's child. It's not your child, and it's not very old. It's not someone you know. It's not someone you've had a conversation with. It's not someone you love in any way at all. You have no relationship with this child until you fished it out of the water and you've been clinging to this lifeboat, saving your life and the child's life as the boat is slowly sinking. And you're both going to die. In very short order, you're both going to die of drowning because that boat is going to sink and you'll have nothing to keep you afloat. And just at that point, here comes another lifeboat. It's my lifeboat with my 9 survivors on it, my 8 survivors now because we threw the crazy guy overboard. And we threw the crazy guy overboard. I've got some room. I've got room for 1. And you've got time enough to move one body on my boat before your boat sinks and the 2 of you drown. And so the question is, who goes first? Do you scramble over that child in order to save your own life, or do you pass the child up first and hope that there's enough time to rescue you, knowing that there might not be? Which do you do? I don't should people. We're talking about really serious, difficult moral choices, and I promise you that I've caused a lot of people pain in the past few weeks in talking about these Planned Parenthood abortions. But I don't should people individually. I don't tell people what to do. I wouldn't tell you what to do in that circumstance. If you chose to save your own life and let the child drown, I would not fault you for that. This is an emergency. This is lifeboat ethics in play. And one of the things that makes lifeboat ethics distinguishable from everyday ethics is the emergency situation. And the emergency implies that every choice that is made in that circumstance will be suboptimal. Every choice that is made in that circumstance will result in enduring lifelong pain. Every choice that you make in that circumstance will necessarily be to the left of the 0 on the number line. It will move you away from splendor and toward squalor. You are engaged in a calculus of loss, and whatever choice you make in an emergency referencing to the calculus of loss is the choice that you made. I can't make your choice for you, and I won't judge you for the choice that you make in that circumstance because there was no right choice. There were only less wrong and more wrong. And if you made a choice that seems to me to be more wrong, I absolve you because of the circumstance. So if you choose to save your own life in that circumstance, I'm not going to regard that choice as being morally reprehensible. You didn't have the time to deliberate, to examine the future consequences of the choice. But here's the reality of the situation. Having made that choice, you will never forget it. You'll never forget it. It is much alike to killing the mouse, killing the kitten, abandoning the hitchhiker, evicting the squatter. If you choose your life over the child's life in that circumstance, the child's life will be over. But the pain that you feel for choosing your life over that child's life will never be gone from your mind. It will be with you forever. And if we complicate the scenario one step more excruciating by making it your own child, it's your own 2-year-old, who you do know and do love, and have had a lot of time to fall in love with. 9 months before she was born and 24 months since then, and you know all about her. You know how she smells in a crowd. You see her in silhouette, standing with her wobbly way of standing. You see her 100 yards away and only in silhouette in a group of other children, and nevertheless you can identify your child by that silhouette. You know everything there is to know about her. You know more about her than she knows about herself at that moment, but you'll know everything about that child's life for the rest of your life. And if you choose your own life in that circumstance, rather than passing your baby into the lifeboat and maybe drowning in consequence, if you choose your own life in that circumstance, the pain that you feel will be all but unendurable. This is a very poor choice. And this is 5 different ways of understanding the moral consequences of abortion by analogy. And taking account of those analogies, if you're with me on all five? That killing a mouse, killing a kitten, abandoning a hitchhiker, evicting a squatter, choosing your life over a child's life in an emergency, if you're with me on all five of those, then you're with me on abortion. You have no reasonable, rational, factually appropriate means of arguing for a much worse atrocity, for killing your own son or daughter as a matter of convenience in pursuit of birth control. You have no way of hewing to that pro-abortion argument. I've taken abortion away from the pro-abortion forces. I've taken all of their arguments away. I can continue to do this. I can do it with any pro-abortion argument. I have shown you why abortion is always self-destructive to the actor, even in the case of rape, even when the mother's own health is at stake, which is what we're talking about with that lifeboat argument. I have shown you why this is necessarily self-destructive. I have met with zero opposition, and there is no limit to how much of this I can do. I think that people who uphold traditional Western morality, whether they're religious or not, if you are an advocate of traditional Western morality, of sexual chastity, sexual marital monogamy, lifelong marriage, serious hoplite families, if you are an advocate of traditional Western values as it relates to love, sex, marriage, and family, I think you should get behind me in a big way, because I can defend everything that you want in secular terms. I do not need to make any reference to the supernatural. We're talking about nothing but demonstrable, objective facts of reality. And I can defend this to 9 decimal places. I've got a book in me. I don't intend to write it. If you want me to write this book, whether it's about abortion, about sexual morality, or my preference about celebrating what's wonderful about humanity and why there is no limit to the good to be realized from having more and more and more babies, get me a deal. Get me a book deal and I'll write this book. No one wants to talk about this. No one wants to hear about this. So if this book is going to exist, you're going to need a distribution strategy, giving it out free to church youth groups and high school health classes or whatever. But these arguments need to be made to young people before they make inescapable, ineradicable, lifelong mistakes in their sex lives. I can demonstrate why the arguments undergirding the sexual revolution are entirely anti-human. The escape from love and commitment, the pursuit of meat market sexuality, the evisceration of the family through the family courts, the diminution of the value of marriage by emphasizing romantic love and de-emphasizing, completely forgetting about storgic love, and this vicious, awful, atrocious, monstrous abortion culture. I can take away all of this. I can demonstrate the error of all of this and help children understand the appropriate, existentially appropriate way to express their sexuality, the appropriate way to experience love, sex, marriage, and family, rationally appropriate to our nature as organisms, as human beings. I can do this. If you want it done, make contact and let's figure out how to get it done. In the meantime, this is church like you've never been to church. This is a church like you've never... What job should church do more than help people find happiness by avoiding well-established paths to misery? And the sexual morality thrust upon us by Marxists in the form of the sexual revolution produces nothing but lifelong misery for people, with abortion being the worst arrow in that quiver. What church shouldn't be taking this up, and why is it that only my church actually does? Why would you go anywhere else? I'm glad to have you here. Whether it's a dozen or 10 dozen or 1,000 dozen, I'm glad to have you here. and I'll talk to you next week.